Imagine this. Your wife is home alone, and suddenly 3 massive bikers roll up to your house. They pound on the door, chains in hand, and tell her that you'd better obey the HOA, or else. That's exactly what happened to me. But here's what they didn't know. I'm not the kind of man you can scare. In just 3 minutes, those bikers went from threatening my wife to begging me to stop. The knock on the door that morning wasn't just any knock. It was the kind of pounding that rattles the walls and makes your stomach drop before you even know why. My wife, Sarah, had been in the kitchen making coffee when she heard it. At first, she thought it might be a delivery or maybe a neighbor. But when she opened the door, her entire body froze. Standing on our porch were 3 massive men dressed in black leather jackets, their engines still roaring from the motorcycles parked at the curb, the low rumble vibrating through the quiet street like a warning. They weren't just standing there casually, they loomed. Each of them towered over her, broad-shouldered, with arms covered in tattoos that looked like they told stories of violence and survival. One of them, the biggest of the group, had a thick chain wrapped tight around his fist, the metal glinting in the morning sunlight as if he had been waiting for the chance to use it. Sarah's hand gripped the doorknob so tightly her knuckles turned white, and though she tried to keep her voice steady, she couldn't stop the tremor in her chest. Before she could even ask what they wanted, the one with the chain leaned forward until his face was inches from hers, his breath reeking of smoke and menace, and in a low growl he said, "Your husband better cooperate with the HOA or else." It wasn't a request. It was a threat. Sarah felt her knees weaken beneath her. She was alone, vulnerable, and terrified, staring into the eyes of men who didn't look like they were here to talk. Every instinct screamed at her to slam the door, but fear paralyzed her in place. Her mind raced. What if they forced their way in? What if they hurt her? What if this was only the beginning? She somehow found the strength to close the door slowly and lock it before rushing to grab her phone. When she called me, her voice was breaking, trembling so much I could barely understand her. "They sent bikers," she whispered, as if even speaking too loudly would bring danger crashing into our home. "They're standing right outside. They said they're here because of the HOA. They're threatening me." Hearing those words nearly made my blood boil. I could hear the fear in her tone, the quiver of someone who felt cornered in their own house. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I drove back from town, every muscle in my body tense with rage. I had dealt with the HOA's nonsense before, the endless complaints, the petty fines, the way they tried to bully and control every detail of our lives. But this was something darker. They had crossed a line, sending hired muscle to intimidate my wife. While there wasn't just cowardly, it was war. Something inside me snapped in that moment. I wasn't just a husband rushing home anymore. I was a man on a mission, ready to protect what was mine at any cost. I told Sarah to stay inside, to lock every window and every door, and not to open up for anyone until she saw me standing outside. She tried to hold back tears, but her voice cracked as she whispered, "Please hurry." And as I pressed down on the gas, the roar of my truck's engine answered for me. Let me rewind a bit and explain how this all started, because the truth is, the trouble didn't come out of nowhere. It had been building for years, slowly poisoning what was supposed to be a peaceful suburban life. We lived in a neighborhood that looked quiet and picture-perfect on the surface. Freshly mowed lawns, kids riding bikes on the cul-de-sac, neighbors waving politely as they collected their mail. But behind that postcard image lurked the iron fist of the Homeowners Association, an organization that seemed to care less about community and more about control. And at the center of it all was Karen, the HOA president. She wasn't just strict, she was power-hungry. The kind of woman who thrived on confrontation and lived for the chance to remind people that she was in charge. The first time we clashed, it seemed minor. I had parked my truck in the driveway overnight, something I'd done dozens of times before. But one morning I found a letter taped to my door claiming I was in violation of neighborhood standards. I thought it was a mistake, so I brushed it off. A week later, another notice came. This time about the American flag I had hung proudly in front of my house. According to Karen, it was too large and distracting. That one infuriated me, because my father, a veteran, had taught me to treat the flag with respect, and no one, Certainly not a woman with a clipboard and a superiority complex was going to tell me otherwise. But I stayed calm, filed an appeal, and kept living my life. Then came the final straw. I had spent months building a small workshop in my backyard, a place where I could tinker with projects, fix things, and teach my son how to use tools the way my father once taught me. It wasn't an eyesore. It was neat, sturdy, and blended in just fine. But the moment it was finished, I received another notice, this one more aggressive than the rest. Remove unauthorized structure immediately or face daily fines. That's when I realized this wasn't about rules. It was about power. Karen didn't like the idea that someone in the neighborhood might do something without her permission, something that reminded her she wasn't the queen she thought she was. I refused to back down. I wasn't breaking any city laws. My permits were in order, and my land was mine. I told her exactly that, in no uncertain terms. From that moment forward, it became a battle of wills. Every week, there was a new letter, a new warning, a new attempt to grind me down. Neighbors who were too scared to stand up to her whispered to me at the mailbox, saying they admired my fight, but didn't dare join it. Karen smiled smugly whenever she passed me, her eyes glinting with the kind of malice that told me she was planning her next move. Still, I never imagined how far she'd go. I thought the worst she could do was slap me with fines or take me to court, but I underestimated just how petty, vindictive, and desperate she could be when her authority was challenged. Instead of playing by the book, she decided to play dirty. And that's how it happened. How my wife ended up face to face with 3 biker thugs on our doorstep. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just an HOA dispute anymore. This was war. When I pulled into the driveway that afternoon, the first thing I saw wasn't my house, or even my wife's face in the window. It was the line of motorcycles parked like predators across my front lawn. Their chrome frames gleamed in the sunlight, engines still ticking as if daring me to approach. The sight alone was enough to tell me this wasn't just a warning. It was a message, loud and clear, meant to intimidate. And then I saw Sarah, my wife, standing behind the curtain in the living room window. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, her hand pressed against the glass as though she wanted to reach out but couldn't. My heart tightened in my chest, and at that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the HOA, not their threats, not even the danger standing in front of me. All I could think about was that they had dared to scare her, dared to bring their fight to my doorstep, dared to touch what was mine. As I shut off my truck and stepped out, the bikers turned to face me. Their smirks told me everything. They thought they had already won. The tallest one, with arms like tree trunks and a sneer that reeked of arrogance, cracked his knuckles loudly, as if to punctuate his dominance. Another one adjusted the chain still dangling from his fist, swinging it lightly as though he was warming up. They wanted me to see them as monsters, to feel small, to feel weak. But the truth was, their show of power only fueled the fire building inside me. I didn't yell, I didn't rush, I didn't even let them see me flinch. Instead, I walked toward them slowly, deliberately, each step heavy with purpose. My silence was louder than any threat I could have spoken, and I could see the flicker of uncertainty in their eyes, though they tried to mask it with bravado. Finally, one of them broke the silence, his voice dripping with menace. "You better listen to the HOA, buddy. Next time we won't be so polite." The others chuckled darkly, clearly expecting me to cower, to apologize, to fold like every other neighbor they had probably scared into submission. But I stopped right there in the driveway, planted my feet firmly, and looked them straight in the eyes. Then, in a voice steady enough to cut through the thick air, I said, "You made the worst mistake of your lives. You came to my home. You threatened my wife. And now, you're going to regret it." The words hung between us like a blade. For a moment, there was silence. Then they laughed. Loud, mocking laughter. The kind bullies use when they think they've cornered someone too weak to fight back. But their laughter didn't shake me. It only confirmed how blind they were to the storm that was about to hit them. Slowly, without breaking eye contact, I turned back toward my truck. They expected me to retreat, maybe grab a wallet or make a phone call. But when I opened the door and reached inside, their laughter faltered. And when I pulled out what I had kept in the backseat for years, their faces drained of color. It wasn't a gun, and it wasn't anything deadly. It was a long, hardened combat staff, scarred with years of use, smooth where my grip had trained over endless hours. To them, it probably looked like just a stick, but I saw the recognition in their eyes when they realized I wasn't just some suburban homeowner. I was someone who knew exactly how to use it. Their smirks vanished, their posture shifted, and for the first time that day, I saw hesitation in their eyes. They had come to scare me. Instead, they were about to learn fear. What those bikers didn't know, and what the HOA certainly hadn't bothered to find out before sending them, was that before I ever moved into this quiet suburban neighborhood, before I ever worried about lawn regulations or mailbox paint colors, I had lived a very different life. I was a Navy SEAL, trained to handle combat situations far deadlier than 3 hired bullies on motorcycles, and though I had retired years earlier, the skills never left me. They were etched into my bones, into my reflexes, into every decision I made under pressure. So when I tightened my grip on that combat staff, I wasn't holding a simple piece of wood. I was holding years of discipline, experience, and precision. The first thug, the one with the chain, decided he'd make an example out of me. With a roar, he charged forward, swinging the chain like a whip. But to me his movements were sluggish, predictable, the kind of wild, untrained aggression I'd seen 1,000 times in rookies who thought strength alone won fights. In less than 2 seconds, I sidestepped, spun my staff low, and swept his legs out from under him. He hit the concrete, so hard his breath exploded out of his chest, the chain clattering uselessly beside him. The second biker didn't hesitate. He lunged at me, trying to catch me off guard while I was focused on his buddy. He swung a heavy fist at my jaw, but I shifted, caught his wrist midair, twisted with a sharp crack of joints, and forced him to the ground. His scream echoed through the street as he dropped like a stone, the pain in his wrist making him clutch at the ground instead of me. By now, the third one wasn't smirking anymore, his bravado drained, his swagger replaced by the sudden realization that he and his friends weren't predators at all, but prey. He backed away slowly, his hands up, shaking his head as if trying to deny the reality in front of him. "Hey man, take it easy," he stammered, his voice cracking under the pressure. But his hesitation cost him. He glanced at his fallen friends for too long, and in that moment of distraction, I closed the distance. The staff swung upward, stopping just inches from his throat. He froze, his eyes wide, his chest heaving, as though the mere sight of the weapon about to strike him had knocked the air from his lungs. Within 3 minutes, all 3 of them were groaning on the ground, their arrogance shattered, their bodies aching from hits they never saw coming. They had walked up to my home thinking they were wolves sent to terrify a helpless family, but now they looked more like stray dogs caught in a storm, whimpering for a way out. "Please, man, we didn't know you were you." One of them gasped between shallow breaths, his voice desperate, his earlier threats replaced with trembling apologies. Another clutched his twisted wrist and stammered, "We were just doing what the HOA told us. We don't want trouble, we swear." Their begging only fueled my anger, because I knew the fear in my wife's eyes would take a long time to erase, and no apology could undo what they had done to her peace of mind. I stood over them, the staff still firm in my hands, and in a voice low but sharp enough to cut through their panic, I said, "You don't get to threaten my family. You don't get to walk onto my property and act like you own it. You picked the wrong man, and if you ever come back here again, I promise you, you won't just regret it, you'll never forget it." My words hung heavy in the air, and for a moment, the only sound was the rumble of their idling motorcycles in the background. Then, scrambling like beaten dogs, they limped toward their bikes, dragging one another up, groaning with each step, their tough guy act completely stripped away. They didn't look back, not once, as they kicked their engines to life and roared down the street, desperate to escape the humiliation and pain of being dismantled in mere minutes by the very man they were sent to intimidate. And as the dust from their tires settled, the neighborhood went quiet again, but the silence this time was different. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, charged, the kind of silence that comes after a storm, when everyone knows nothing will ever be the same. That night, after the roar of the motorcycles had long faded and the street had gone still, my wife clung to me in the living room, her body trembling even though she tried to hide it, her voice cracking as she whispered that for a moment she thought she might never see me again. I held her close, feeling the weight of everything crash down on us. The fear, the anger, the sheer audacity of what had just happened. And I promised her it was over, that no one would ever come to our door again, thinking they could scare us into submission. But deep down, I knew it wasn't enough to just send those bikers packing. This wasn't just about 3 men on motorcycles. It was about the HOA that had hired them. The twisted leadership of Karen and her cronies, who believed intimidation was a valid weapon against people who dared to resist them. So, the very next morning, I went down to the police station and filed a full report. Not just about the bikers, but about the HOA itself. I laid out every letter, every petty fine, every demand they had made over the years, and I told the officers exactly what had happened the night before. At first, the bikers tried to keep quiet, but the moment they were questioned and realized they could face serious charges for harassment and intimidation, their tough guy act crumbled. They spilled everything: who had contacted them, how much they'd been paid, even the exact words Karen had used when she ordered them to send a message to me and my family. Once that truth came out, the entire neighborhood buzzed like a hive shaken from sleep. Neighbors who had once ignored the HOA's bullying or complied silently began to see Karen for what she really was: a petty tyrant who had crossed a line so severe it put all of us in danger. The HOA board, desperate to distance themselves, turned on her, and suddenly the woman who had strutted through the streets with a clipboard and a smug grin found herself cornered. Legal action was taken. Fines were levied. Karen herself was dragged into hearings where her smug mask finally cracked, replaced by a pale, bitter face that had lost its power. The HOA's reign of intimidation collapsed almost overnight because once people realized they didn't have to fear her, once they saw that standing up could win, they refused to bow anymore. And as for me, I kept my workshop. I kept my flag. I kept my freedom. No one came around anymore with warnings or threats, and no one dared to park their bike in front of my home again. Neighbors began to nod with respect when they saw me, some even thanking me quietly for doing what they hadn't been able to do: stand up and fight back. But the real victory wasn't just in beating the HOA at their own game. It was in the promise I made to my wife that night, holding her in my arms after everything had gone quiet, that she would never again feel unsafe in her own home, that I would protect her no matter what. Because at the end of the day, that's what this fight was about: not rules, not fines, not power struggles, but family, dignity, and the right to live in peace without fear of someone abusing authority. And that's the lesson I want anyone listening to remember. Intimidation only works on those who choose to bow. But when you stand tall, when you face down the bullies and refuse to break, you don't just protect yourself. You inspire others to do the same. So if you've ever been pushed around, if you've ever been told to stay quiet when you knew you were right, remember my story. Stand your ground, because courage spreads faster than fear. And if you want to hear more stories where the underdog wins against injustice, don't forget to subscribe to Bright Struggle, because this fight, my fight, is one we all share, and together we win. And that's how it all went down. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and of course, subscribe to Bright Struggle so you never miss the next powerful story we share. Your support means everything. It keeps us going and helps us bring you even more real, dramatic, and inspiring stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.